Our reading tonight comes from the Gospel according to Mark, the second chapter. We begin with the first verse. When Jesus returned to Capernaum after some days, it was reported that he was at home. So many gathered around that there was no longer room for them, not even in front of the door. And Jesus was speaking the word to them. Then some people came, bringing to him a paralyzed man, carried by 4 of them. And when they could not bring him to Jesus because of the crowd, they removed the roof above him, and after having dug through it, they let down the mat on which the paralytic lay. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Now some of the scribes were sitting there, questioning in their hearts, "Why does this fellow speak in this way? It is blasphemy. Who can forgive sins but God alone?" At once Jesus perceived in his spirit that they were discussing these questions among themselves. And Jesus said to them, "Why do you raise such questions in your hearts? Which is easier to say to the paralytic, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Stand up, take your mat, and walk'? But so that you may know the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." Jesus said to the paralytic, "I say to you, stand up, take your mat, and go to your home." And the man stood up, immediately took the mat, and went out before all of them, so that they were all amazed and glorified God, saying, "We have never seen anything like this." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. This story from Mark's Gospel is one of my absolute favorites in the Bible because for me it shows how hungry people were to hear what Jesus had to say, how they held out hope that maybe even being in Jesus' presence might help whatever was ailing them. So picture this scene. Jesus has returned from his journey, and at once the word had gotten out. The people gathered so tightly to the house that there wasn't room anywhere, not even in front of the door. Can you see this? Can you see the people standing shoulder to shoulder, pushed so tightly together that there's absolutely no room to move? All because they wanted to see this person they called Jesus. All because they believed that this might be the one that the prophets talked about. Do you have that image in your head? Good. Now imagine that these 4 friends show up with this paralyzed man on a makeshift stretcher, and they see this crowd that is firmly together, and there clearly is no way that they're getting in through that front door, or any way else that they can immediately see. What would you do if you were one of these 4 friends? Would you get discouraged by this sight, or would you be determined to find a way to get your friend to see Jesus? Because after all, that's what this has been all about. I mean, we have to admit, right, that it's some out-of-the-box thinking to tear apart the roof and lower the man down. And I mean, that had to be quite the sight. Think of the conversation that must have happened between these 4 friends to arrive at this point, the back and forth that must have occurred as they worked their way to the house with their friend. What must their friend have been thinking as this was happening? I mean, does he have a say in the matter, or was he as determined as his friends to do whatever it takes to see Jesus? Here's what always gets me about this story, though. We find it in verse 5. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Do you hear that? Jesus forgave the sins of the paralyzed man because of the faith of his friends. Their faith had such an impact on Jesus that he had to act. It always gets me. Their faith has made a difference for others. Throughout this Lent season, we've been talking about these treasures we have in clay jars. We've been showing you our cracked pots and how we identify with them. So here's mine. And I'll have to admit that I chose this cracked pot because it really resonates with me. If you look at it from a distance, or you simply take a close glance, it looks like a perfectly good bowl. And then I painted it with bright colors because I thought that would be appealing, right? And the belly of the bowl is deep. There's lots of room in there for Captain Crunch or pasta or popcorn, whatever you might want to put in there. Most people would look at this bowl and they would see it and they would think that this is a really mighty fine bowl. But if you look a little closer, you can see, take a look here. If you look a little bit closer, you can see that a crack stops it from being as perfect as we might have first thought. I mean, even a closer look, you can see there's some holes in there, and you can see how bad that crack is. We start to think about how useless this bowl really might be because this big crack is poorly glued back together. Like, I almost didn't do it with any care whatsoever. I mean, the closer you look at this bowl, the more critical you can become of it. And all of a sudden it becomes not a very good bowl at all. Not as good as a bowl if you just hold it from back here. I often feel that way about myself. I can quickly list off the ways that I'm broken, that I'm useless, while others will see me from a distance and never think that because either I won't let them, or I don't let them get close enough, or they don't care to look close enough to see all the brokenness that exists in my life. Left to my own devices, I probably could quickly give up because that's how often we do. That's often what we do when we are broken people. We give up because what good is it? Thankfully, though, I've got people in my life who look at this broken bowl, and say, well, it's a mighty fine bowl. This broken bowl here, well, it might not, you could put ping pong balls in it. It'd be good for holding ping pong balls. You probably could store marbles in this bowl too. I mean, you could put your wallet, your watch, your keys. I mean, something that's not liquid or tiny. This is a great bowl for all of that. And maybe you could eat cereal out of this. You could fill it full of Captain Crunch. Just make sure you put it in a larger bowl to catch all of the milk. Or maybe you don't need milk. There's a lot of things that you could do with this really good bowl if you put your mind to it. I mean, the faith of others will always remind us that we are never too broken for God to use us. God is bigger and stronger than our cracked pot. God is more creative than we can begin to imagine. Too often, we limit God's ability to work in our lives. And instead, we think about how broken and cracked and unusable we are. But the truth is that God can use you regardless of what you think of yourself, regardless of how you see yourself or the world might want you to be seen. So, beloved, I hope that you will always be surrounded by others who see you as worth the effort. I hope that you will always be surrounded by others who will tear off the roof of the house so that you can get in to see Jesus, so that you can be reminded that you are forgiven, that you are loved, that no matter how cracked and ugly and broken and unimpressive you might think your bowl is, I hope that you're always surrounded by people who will look at you and say, that's nonsense. Your bowl is beautiful and it's usable and it was created specifically for you, by you. And nothing will ever change that. I hope that you will be reminded again and again that we have this treasure in clay jars, And even though we might feel broken, we are also feel that we are forgiven. Their faith has made you well. I hope you know you are loved. You are loved by God, a God who has made you perfect in God's own image. No matter what.